The ostrich, the great and mighty bird, keep watch over all of us as we sleep calmly through the night, knowing that if there were ever any potential danger that may befall us in the evening time, the ostrich would warn us and alert us to the problem, getting us out of harm's way and away from danger with enough time to make it to safety. Of course, this comes with some drawbacks, as ostriches, as we all know, sometimes just stick their head in the sand for no reason whatsoever. And if the danger were to come upon us while the ostrich's head is in the sand, well, that would pose a problem to not only ostrich, but to all of us, as they aren't aware of what's going on around them because, well, their head is in the sand. I guess it is a pretty good trade-off, though, because sometimes the ostrich can see what's going on around the horizon across the savanna. They'll be able to alert us to the danger, again, so long as their head isn't buried in the sand. Well, that's, of course, if they ever bury their heads in the sand. Because if I were an ostrich and I was going to have to alert somebody if danger were to come, and I were to fail at alerting people if danger were to come, I would just pretend my head was in the sand, which would absolve me of any guilt or blame cast upon me by the people who were tasking me with watching over as they fell asleep. I hope that this metaphor will make sense and I can tie this all in together at the end, but I guess you'll just have to wait and see if I can pull it off. My name is Jobob. I have some thoughts, and they are as follows. Humdinger, but abstract metaphor aside, my first thought is this: the Fauci testimony in front of Congress earlier this week. Now, I will admit at the onset, I am deeply involved in this. If you've watched any episode I've done for an extended period of time, I have been saying Dr. Fauci should be in jail for a very long time. This is not anything new that I now think. However, it is really interesting to see the gun that now is not only smoking with Dr. Fauci somewhat in the vicinity, the gun is smoking in Fauci's hand as he points it at the head of the American people, but people around the world that died from the Fauci fever, and they're collapsed on the floor with blood spattered on the wall. Dr. Fauci is sitting there holding the smoking gun. That's how big of a smoking gun this has now become. Before we get into what exactly that is and what it actually means, I will concede this. The trajectory of evidence against Dr. Fauci has been a slow and steady uphill climb. For a lot of us, we kind of had a bad feeling about Dr. Fauci kind of from early on. At the very beginning, I think everybody was like, okay, well, he's an honest broker in this. He just wants to make sure people are safe. And even though we think that a lot of his ideas are a little bit extreme, keep in mind that his position necessitates the most extreme example. And the way that we combat that is, politically or through the conscious mind of the people that have the right to do whatever it is that they want to do despite what they're being told. All of that can be true. But then slowly, over time, we started recognizing some inconsistencies in what Dr. Fauci was saying versus what we were finding out. Remember, if you said that the Wuhan coronavirus bat fever, Fauci fever, leaked from a lab, you were taken off the internet. And, well, that ended up being true. I think, remember, there was a segment of the Colbert Show where Jon Stewart came on and gave this sarcastic lambasting to anybody who didn't believe it. So what I'm saying is that the snowball was slowly starting to turn. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, why did you say that? Oh, what happened here? And that's how we get into these two various camps of people who haven't really been paying much attention to what all of this is and what it means, and those of us who have been hyper involved in it from the beginning. And the people who've been hyper involved in it, not versus, but in relation to the people who haven't been paying attention, will have reactions to the words that I'm about to say, depending on where you are on this spectrum of knowing and not knowing. If you're in the know, words like Peter Daszak, the EcoHealth Alliance, the NIH's funding to Wuhan, none of those words or phrases are foreign to you whatsoever. But if you have no idea what's going on, then you're going to look at those words and go, what the heck are you talking about? I don't know what those things mean. Do you know what those things mean? And here's what I'm trying to say ultimately. The two camps and everybody in between, the gradations of those camps in between, of the people who have no idea what I'm talking about and the people that know explicitly what I'm talking about, mean nothing in this case. What I mean to say is, if you've been paying attention from the beginning or you haven't been paying attention to this at all, none of that matters because of how much smoke is coming out of the gun that is still being held by Dr. Fauci in this particular instance. Before Fauci testified in front of Congress, the New York Post, among other outlets, released emails that were sent by Dr. Fauci's right-hand man, his #1 guy by the name of Dr. Morens. Those emails, and I'll put them up on the screen here, said this. This email was sent April 21st, 2021 from Dr. Morens to Peter Daszak, of all people. And again, you don't need to know who that person is for this to be impactful and important. P.S. I forgot to say, there's no worry about FOIAs, the Freedom of Information Act orders, which allow the American people, the taxpayer who pay for all of these bureaucrats to do their job and their misinformation. We get to know what it is that they're doing because we're paying for what they're doing. So he's telling this guy, Dr. Morens, who is Dr. Fauci's right-hand man, that I forgot to mention, you don't need to worry about FOIAs. I'm quoting, I can either send stuff to Tony on his private Gmail or hand it to him at work or at his home. He's too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble. Like I said, you don't have to have any prior knowledge of Dr. Fauci's corruption for this to be abundantly clear that not only is there smoke coming out of the gun that just went off, Dr. Fauci is holding it in his hand with a menacing look on his face. There are multiple other emails that Dr. Morens sent. This is in May of 2021. I suggested Arthur try interview Tony, which is Anthony Fauci, directly and connected him to our secret back channel. Emailed Tony a few hours ago. What secret back channel could that be? Could that be private email servers, not government-issued email servers? And if you don't know anything about emails and servers and what is government work and what isn't government work, this is the same exact thing Hillary got in trouble for. Basically, that she was doing government work on her own private email, which was housed on a private server, not even a Gmail account. At least Fauci is using Gmail, which would lead us to believe that Google still has those emails. Whether or not we will ever get to see them, who knows, but chances are they probably still exist. And there probably, unfortunately, won't be enough pressure from the public to actually see those emails. Bottom line here is that this entire time, apparently, in the Fauci circle, people knew not to send certain things to his government email, even though he was doing government work. Instead, they would go to the secret back channels or the Gmail account because Fauci is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could get him in trouble. Here's the problem. Even though all of this is entirely public, Fauci testified in front of Congress and said this when asked if he does government work through government emails or in his own private emails. Watch this.
Did you ever delete an official record?
No.
Dr. Fauci, did you ever conduct official business via email?
To the best of my recollection and knowledge, I have never conducted official business via my private email.
You can be the biggest Fauci fanboy in the world, But this is as clear as day. This is why I don't think the two camps of the people who know nothing and the people who know everything and everybody in between, this is why I don't think it matters in this case. It's not even a gun anymore. It's a bazooka with a plume of smoke in Fauci's hand. Not only having emails leaked from the guy who was his first-hand guy, his right-hand man, saying, yeah, we definitely use back channels, to people that were using those back channels, but now he's saying, no, we never did that. I don't know how you're supposed to take that, other than Dr. Fauci is holding a bazooka with a plume of smoke in his hand as we walk into the room and witness the death all across the floor with blood spattered on the walls, and Dr. Fauci saying, I didn't do it. Here's what this ultimately is, and this is where I think we have fallen asleep and we've trusted the ostriches to warn us in the night. Is at the end of the day, and I hate saying this, but I do believe it's true, I don't think any of this matters. Or at least, I don't think any of this will matter. Is it fireworks for TV? Absolutely. Is it fodder for campaign fundraising? 100%. But will it actually make a difference? My answer to that is I don't think so. And I hate the fact that I don't think so. But the reason that I have a feeling this is not going to cause any sort of uproar, which I think it warrants, or I think that should happen, is that we, the American people, have fallen asleep at the wheel and we've become apathetic. And that's kind of the theme of what we're going towards here, is that nobody, Dr. Fauci primarily, will not pay a political price for the clear and evident, abundant lies that he issued while he was in a position of power within the US government. And part of that, I think, is one, we've fallen asleep, but two, this has kind of been a long upward trajectory, like I mentioned earlier, of a snowball rolling of evidence against Dr. Fauci. And while some of us have been paying close attention to that snowball as it gains steam or gains snow, snowball wouldn't gain steam, it would just melt at that point. The snowball gained more snow and got bigger and bigger. All the while that was happening, the people who were blinded by ideology, who fell asleep at the wheel due to their ideology, were also mounting a defense because they liked Dr. Fauci. This is a Facebook post, a real Facebook post, a screenshot that I took, and I blocked out his name, of a real person that I actually know, who posted this, that says, Dr. Fauci, thank you for your service. And it's a picture, if you're just listening to this, it's a picture of Dr. Fauci looking astute and heroic as we, the nation, thank him for his service. All that is to say is that while we've been ramping up this amount of evidence, this cascading snowball of evidence against Dr. Fauci, they have been digging their roots in deeper and deeper and deeper, knowing that there's nothing that can be done that will assuage their adoration for Dr. Fauci. And therein lies the problem. The people and the society and the culture and the taxpayers specifically who are tasked with holding the bureaucrats accountable, the majority of them are asleep at the wheel. And unfortunately, even though the evidence is overwhelming and damning at this point, I don't think anything is going to happen. And that is a symptom of a bigger problem. On second thought, maybe Hunter Biden is a fantastically talented U.S. attorney. Or he's a crackhead that's using his privilege to get out of a lot of bad situations that he's put himself into. The jury selection recently for the Hunter Biden gun charges started, and there was a lot of hullabaloo around it from the right side of the aisle saying, look this is how terrible this is. These are all of these things that we're about to lay out in this Hunter gun trial, to the I dare to say further right, but more to the Second Amendment people saying, why is this a gun crime? Because you can't own a gun as a drug addict. Okay, well, what is a drug addict? Who decides who is a drug addict? And what if, I don't know, I have a beer on a Saturday and someone says, you're an alcoholic, you can't own a gun. Does the government get to take your guns away? To the lefty side saying, this is nothing. Hunter is a well-meaning individual who unfortunately was ruined by drugs, which I can sympathize with. But considering he's in the position that he's in and getting away with a lot of the stuff and the plea deal and all that sort of stuff around Hunter Biden and his enormous wealth amassed from being an artist, yeah, there's a much bigger problem there in the lefty media as well. But before we get into the main thing about this Hunter resurgence into the news, which I think surrounds around this laptop and whether or not the laptop is real and who said it wasn't real and it's Russian disinformation, before we get to kind of that, I do want to highlight the fact that it is unbelievably ironic. And I mean unbelievably ironic in the way that Alanis Morissette would go, that's too ironic. That Joe Biden, the President of the United States, who has, as a part of all of his issues that he cares about and his talking points, has gun restriction is one of my top priorities, and straight cisgender white males get away with everything and we have to stop these privileged individuals from doing so. And rich need to pay their fair share in taxes. How on earth are the rich getting away with not paying their fair share in taxes? Those three issues slash talking points being massively integrated into the Biden outlook, strategy, campaign, whatever you want to call it. How ironic is it that Hunter has run afoul of all of them on the gun charges? Hunter Biden was not obeying the rules that Joe Biden, while a senator in the 90s, pushed so hard to get into law. The law that Joe Biden says, look, we did it. We made it difficult for drug addicts to get guns, or whatever it is that that law specifically says that Hunter Biden ran afoul of, because like I said, I don't think this actually matters in real life. Whatever the law, Hunter Biden's like, screw it. That doesn't matter. Even though my dad made his political career based on passing these kinds of laws, whatever. Second is the whole privilege thing. The ironic part about Joe Biden and Democrats just as a whole, there exists not a single person who is more privileged than Hunter Biden, which it's just hilarious if you think about it. White male privilege, Joe Biden says, remember when he said white supremacy is the biggest threat to democracy? Holy cow. But white male privilege, which Hunter has utilized to negotiate the plea deal that, thank God, a judge caught and didn't actually get through, but then put himself out of the same situations that other people who didn't have his privilege would be in. And by privilege, I don't mean at all with race. I'm talking about his status and who his dad is. Hunter Biden is in significantly less trouble because of who his family is than a normal, everyday, average person is like you and me. So if that is not privilege, I don't know what is. And lastly, the rich need to pay their fair share. Unless your name is Hunter Biden, in which case you can skate on all of your taxes like Hunter did. And the funniest thing about this is, I was watching MSNBC because I like to punish myself for my sins. But I was sitting through an MSNBC show and they were talking about, well, Hunter Biden did pay all those back taxes. No, he didn't. The taxes got paid. Not by Hunter Biden, though, but instead by some LA entertainment attorney that supposedly met him at an art gallery, and not one of the famous orgies that Hunter Biden definitely attended. But that's the guy who paid his back taxes. Now, I wonder if there was any sort of understanding that, well, if I pay these back taxes for you, maybe I have bigger and deeper access to the President of the United States. Nah, it's probably just a friend that said, well, I like this guy enough to where I'm going to pay millions of dollars in his defense and back taxes. That's probably what happened. So aside from the thing that we're going to talk about more specifically, I just find it so ironic that Hunter Biden is running afoul of one of his or several of his dad's major key points. It's just so juicy and hilarious and funny all at the same time. But in the process of the Hunter Biden gun trial, part of the evidence is the laptop, which is an interesting kind of dynamic to have. Because for a long time, the laptop was this theoretical thing that we knew existed physically, but talked about in a way that was like, well, the laptop, ooh, the laptop, as if it wasn't actually real. The laptop is the holy grail that Indiana Jones is in search of we know it exists and we know it's there, but we don't have it in our hands. And so is it actually there? Is it a real thing, or is it just a representation of our frustration built against this corrupt Biden family? Well, turns out the laptop is actually real. And again, I don't need to tell all of you folks that, but as it sat there in the courtroom on display as evidence, it kind of bubbled up into what is ultimately our theme for this episode, in that it is real and it was legit. But why was there so much questioning around it? Well, because the campaign, the people that were running the Biden campaign, who some of the names I'm sure you'll recognize, decided to make it so convolutedly difficult for anyone to know whether or not the laptop was real, despite the people who did know the laptop was real, that they forced a narrative into the American mind that many Americans still hold to this day. If you asked a person who has fallen asleep due to drinking too much ideology, they might tell you the Hunter Biden laptop is a Russian hoax. It objectively is not a Russian hoax, but where did they get that idea? Well, in October of 2020, right before the election, days before the election, there was a letter signed by 50 former intelligence agents that said this Hunter Biden laptop has all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. This was an actual line from Politico, I think it might have been the headline, that said more than 50 former senior intelligence officials have signed onto a letter outlining their belief that the recent disclosure of emails allegedly belonging to Joe Biden's son has all the classic earmarks of Russian misinformation, a Russian information operation. Now you may ask yourself, well, who signed these? Who is the 50 former senior intelligence officials? Because if it's just some guy that nobody has heard about, doesn't really matter, you know, maybe the American people won't take that very seriously. But people did take it very seriously. And you have to ask the question, okay, then why did they take it very seriously? Maybe because some heavy hitters were signed onto that list. Let me see if you recognize any of these names. James Clapper, former director of the National Intel. John Brennan, former director of the CIA. Leon Panetta, former director of the CIA, and also former Secretary of Defense. Mike Morrell, the acting director of the CIA, and the list goes on and on about people who you have heard of. And because they threw their weight behind this fictitious document that said the laptop is Russian misinformation, a lot of people believed it. And who coordinated the laptop is fake Russian information letter to have all these people sign it? None other than a senior campaign advisor to the Biden campaign, Antony Blinken, who, if you don't know, is the Secretary of State. Maybe he did something very important during the campaign that allowed Joe Biden to give him such a high-ranking position in the administration. I guess we'll never know. But of course, all of these things are why the New York Post got locked out of their Twitter account for months, weeks, months, for a period of time. They couldn't tweet because they said the laptop was real. All in the face of this particular instance, who I think a lot of people, or which a lot of people I think forgot about. In November of 2019, the FBI authenticated the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop was real, according to multiple sources. In other words, a year before people signed on to that letter, these high-ranking partisan hacks, intelligence former officials signed on to this letter, A year before the debates where Joe Biden said, that's Russian and disinformation, and he told the whole world, the whole country that was watching, that it's Russian disinformation. A year prior to all of that, the FBI knew that it was real, which has to mean that Hunter, if he were coherent enough to understand, knew it was real. And if Hunter knew that it was real, now that we know that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden talk on a daily basis, Joe Biden probably knew it was real. In other words, they lied out their butts and were rewarded for it. Why? Why were they able to get away with that stuff? The same problem that we have in the Fauci situation, because there are too many people asleep at the wheel. I will, although, leave a caveat for this. This is an unfavorable caveat, but it could be that the 50 people that signed on to that letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was misinformation and held all of these top positions in the CIA, national intelligence, and SecDef, and maybe it is that, well, they're idiots. I'm just leaving room for the caveat that, well, maybe they signed on in good nature, but are in fact idiots, in which case we have a much bigger problem on our hand. If the people that you've heard of, John Brennan, James Clapper, Leon Panetta, Mike Morrell, the litany of other 50 people that signed on to this list, maybe they're being genuine. Maybe they actually thought that this was Russian misinformation. And if they did think that, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to call them an idiot. In which case, don't we have a bigger problem if the CIA is being run by idiots? What I'm trying to get at here is I don't think they're idiots. I think they're lying. At the end of the day, unfortunately, I think too many people are asleep and trusting people who they have no business trusting to warn them if something actually has gone wrong, that they can't see it themselves, that something has gone terribly wrong. Third thought is, well, at least it's a woman. Yeah, I know almost 40 people got assassinated, but at least we have a woman president in Mexico. In case you missed this story, the mainstream media made a big deal of it. Mexico has elected its first female president. How wonderful is that? We're all supposed to be thrilled about this, not knowing any of her policies, any of the things that she said on the campaign trail. It's just the fact that one of America's neighbors has elected a female president. And why haven't we done so? Because that's the only thing that matters, which in reality makes you a sexist. If that matters more than anything else, I think that by definition makes you a sexist individual. If the only thing that matters is the anatomy and the parts that are down there, you are by default, by definition, a sexist. I, on the other hand, don't care that she's a woman. What does she say? What are the things that she's standing for? And are those things that I can get behind, or are those things that I hate? And by those qualifications, and those qualifications alone, will I decide whether or not it's a good thing that she's the president of Mexico or a bad thing that she's the president of Mexico, as I, unlike a bunch of the lefties, am not a sexist. But the fact that she's a woman doesn't have anything to do with what I think is inherently the bigger problem, and the headline that I think has gone entirely overlooked. Mexico's elections are like our elections. Some countries do it differently, where they have the prime minister or the president or whatever, and then they have the legislative branch, and all of it goes on at different times. Mexico is like us, where they have their big election season, and then everybody across the country, mayors, governors, their version of Congress, the president, all gets elected at one time. Okay, fine. So they have their big election season. In that election season, the headline that everybody is missing, because we're so infatuated with the fact that there's a female president, thank you! The headline that everybody's missing is that 38 candidates in Mexico's election season were assassinated, which is a much bigger deal than the fact that the new incoming president has got a taco and not a hot dog. That doesn't matter. matter to me at all. What I'm focused on is the fact that America's next door neighbor, apparently they're accustomed to, some people get assassinated during elections. That's just what happens. And the reason that I think we can extrapolate that from this is that the killing, this is an article from Reuters based on the 37th killing. They said this: the killing takes the number of assassinated candidates in the 2024 election season in Mexico to 37, which is one more than the 2021 midterm election in which 36 candidates were killed, according to data. Oh, okay. That's a normal thing that we shouldn't pay attention to. We should celebrate the fact that Mexico elected its first female president, because that's what matters. Yeah, I don't really care about that. I care about the cultural normality that apparently is in the country of Mexico. If you run for some sort of elected office, about 40 of you are going to get offed by, well, probably by the cartel, and that's just a normal thing that people in that country have to deal with. What? And I don't want to feign outrage here or, I don't know, whatever, shock, but that's shocking. That is amazing in the true sense of the word, that is happening just below us. Not all that long ago, Mexico was the second most dangerous country in the world. I'm not sure if it still is, but at a time it went Syria, then Mexico. And I don't know if you're geography buffs, but Mexico is right next door to the United States of America. In Joe Biden's mind, it's both next door to America and to Gaza, so Mexico should open up the door to Gaza, but I won't belabor on that joke in case you missed that story of Joe Biden making that claim in his confused mind. All that is to say that the customs of the people who think that that's a normal thing, thank goodness, are being stopped at the border. Thank goodness, in all of Joe Biden's mishaps, he has decided to take control of the US border because, like we've been talking about, 40 people in an election year in Mexico get offed by assassination. We don't want that cultural normality to bleed its way into the United States. That would be insane. And it has nothing to do with race or anything that the lefty people are going to criticize you for deeming bad about Mexico. No, it has the fact of, okay, people in this area think that that's kind of a normal thing. And they think it's a normal thing because it keeps happening. So clearly, evidently, they think it's a normal thing. Them coming into our culture would mean that maybe our cultural values, if there's enough of them coming in, might change in a way that we're not super happy about. But none of that is relevant because the Biden administration, thankfully and heroically, has shored up that border along the United States and Mexico. Unless, of course, everything I said was completely wrong and the Biden administration has opened the border entirely and we have some call a porous border, I would say no border at all, which actually is what is happening. And don't you think that that's going to be problematic? Tucker Carlson took a lot of heat when, after the guilty verdict of Donald Trump in the Manhattan case, which we talked about on the previous episode, which was a sham trial. The whole thing was dumb and stupid. Tucker took a lot of heat because he said, if you import the third world's things that they are accustomed to will happen more in the US. He took a lot of heat for that, but ultimately, is he wrong about that? If I believe, and I hate qualifiers, but as the son of an immigrant and immigrant family, if you come here, there is a reason you came here. And that reason is not because the place that you're coming from is so spectacular and awesome you just wanted to change. No, the reason you came is because the United States of America, for all of its faults, is the land of opportunity. It's the place where people come when the place that they are from isn't cutting it for them. And because that's the reason why people come here, it's not anything other than obvious to say, well, yeah, you should assimilate into the culture that we have here. And by culture, I don't mean art and music and movies and TV. Who cares about that stuff? The culture of what I'm talking about and what the culture wars are truly about is the way of life. If you come to this country, you should want to assimilate with the way of life that has yielded the most prosperous nation in the history of the universe. You shouldn't go, hey, let's just come to this new place but do all of the same stuff. And again, I'm not talking about art, music, movies, TV, that sort of culture. I'm talking about the way of life. Let's do the same corrupt way of life that we did in the old place. Let's just do it here and everything will be fine. That's not how it works. So if you're going to come to the United States, know that you're coming to a place that is better than the place that you left, and assimilate to the culture, because the culture is the way of life that we have is what has brought about such insurmountable success that the United States has enjoyed. My friend Charlie Kirk describes it best, I think, when he just says, borders are a clear delineation of where good ideas end and bad ideas begin. And in this particular instance, the United States of America, good ideas, and Mexico, for all of its triumphs, more often than not, bad ideas and bad norms. If 40 people getting assassinated in an election cycle is normal, that is objectively not good. And the last thing that we want is for those normalities to bleed into a culture where that doesn't exist, but slowly but surely permeate the good culture and end us up in a place where we are no different than a country that has 40 assassinations every election cycle. How does that happen? Everyone fell asleep and we trusted ostriches to warn us if danger was afoot, which I'll discuss in the conclusion. In conclusion, everyone fell asleep at the wheel and for some reason trusted the ostriches to warn us if danger was afoot. Now, we went over some of the drawbacks of that, being that ostriches sometimes stick their head in the sand and aren't aware, just as unaware as the people who are asleep, and therefore can't warn the sleeping people that, well, there is a problem. Even if there is imminent danger, if the ostrich's head is shoved in the sand, nobody knows and everyone suffers. Here's the problem. I don't know if you knew this. The idea that ostriches stick their head in the sand, which is why I use the ostrich as the example for this particular metaphor, is actually a myth. Did you know that? Ostriches don't actually stick their head in the sand. It comes out of the Roman period where I think people were observing ostriches somewhere who, in order to eat, have to keep their head close to the ground, but from a distance, it may seem like, oh, their head is just stuck in the ground. And that myth and legend has carried on for 2,000 plus years to become a metaphor for people who are unaware of things going on around their very head, which is why the metaphor is, if you have your head stuck in the ground, you're unaware of all the problems that surround you because, well, you are unaware of them and can't see them because your head is in the sand. But because ostriches don't stick their head in the ground, I think there's a little bit more to the metaphor that we might be able to extend just a little bit if the ostriches are to represent our media or our leaders or the people that we look up to in the upper echelons of society. If we think that the people in power are after our best interests but maybe make some mistakes sometimes, then maybe we might think it's okay if we fall asleep. And even though they might have their head in the sand and maybe they'll make mistakes here and there, for the most part, they'll have their eye on the horizon, being able to warn us if any danger is to come and be able to act accordingly. Here's where I think the metaphor gets more realistic. If ostriches don't actually stick their head in the sand, but everyone around them thinks they do, they might be able to get away with more simply because people think they stick their head in the sand. What I mean by that is if voters, taxpayers, normal, everyday, average people are asleep at the wheel, thinking that the people in power who are tasked with watching over us might make some mistakes sometimes, but really ultimately have our interest in mind. Anytime they do make a mistake, it can be chalked up to, sometimes things go over their head and they miss stuff and, it happens. And while it does happen, my thinking is it doesn't happen nearly as often as we think it might. Instead, I think the leaders of our society, the upper echelon, the media types, the informers, play on the fact that we think their head is stuck in the ground, and that's the only reason they might make a mistake here or there. But in reality, their heads are never stuck in the ground. What's actually happening is, if something were to go so wrong that the people who were asleep, having not been notified by the ostriches who could have fixed the problem before it became a problem, then can blame the ostrich who didn't notice because his head was stuck in the sand, because that's just a thing that happens now and then, the ostrich, or the leaders, therefore can alleviate themselves of any guilt or blame when something goes terribly wrong in a society. In other words, in the Fauci story, in the Biden laptop story, in the Mexico having 40 candidates assassinated story, if the media wanted to pay attention to the bigger picture of what this means and how dangerous it can be for the people who are there, they are tasked with warning if something bad is happening, if they're going to ignore all of those things and it turns out bad, guess what? Ostriches are faster than pretty much all of their counterparts. The elite upper class, the informers and the media, have more leg strength to outrun the people who are most damaged by them not issuing the warning. If the media decides that they are going to let stuff skate by, and therefore the public lets stuff skate by, if they just let things skate by because it doesn't help with their narrative, but then they're called out by the people who they were supposed to inform, they can always say, I'm sorry, I had no idea. Because at the end of the day, they can outrun all of the people that are truly going to be damaged by them sticking their head in the sand. If they can absolve themselves of any guilt by not paying attention to what they should have known in the first place, we're going to be left in the dust by people who have no responsibility. You're going to be left there having no warning while the ostrich is a mile away before you can blink, out of the sight of danger with no repercussions whatsoever. The answer then is to not trust solely the ostriches to notify you of danger and to be aware of danger on your own. I hate the terms people need to wake up, or people need to start paying attention, or people need to stop being asleep at the wheel. I get that. It's all overplayed, but it's 100% true. If you trust the media to let you know of any danger, what's ultimately going to happen is you're going to be left in the dust of them outrunning whatever danger you now have to deal with. I am fully aware that this metaphor might have been a little bit of a stretch, especially when you factor in the fact that they don't actually stick their heads in the ground and ostriches are super fast. And wait, the ostriches in the media? Yes. If it doesn't make sense, listen to it again. And if it doesn't make sense then, I'm sorry, maybe that was a little bit of a stretch. Maybe next time we'll try and rein it in just a little bit. But that being said, I appreciate you listening or watching whatever platform it is that you're taking this content in on. My name is Jobob. I appreciate you listening to my thoughts. We'll see you next time. God bless America.